Hi there, so I am Justin, and I've been doing some work on Meteor, specifically experimenting with Redis support. So I'm going to start off with a demo that should hopefully be very familiar to all of you. It's the to-dos example. And you can see that it works basically just the same as it always does. But what's new about this is that, of course, it is backed by Redis. So you can see that all those documents are actually stored as Redis keys, and we can get one of them. There we are. So I wanted to talk very quickly today about what I was trying to achieve and sort of some of the lessons and some of the questions. So why Redis is the obvious question to ask first. So Meteor today is really just about Mongo. And the question that I had was sort of how hard would it be to add support for other databases? And Redis seemed like a good one to start with because it has really good change notification support as of 2.8, which should make it easy to do some of those live updates. The good news, as you saw from the demo, is that it works. The really good news for people that are building apps is there are almost no code changes. Like at the moment, you just change from a Meteor collection to a Meteor Redis collection. The bad news is there are lots of open questions, which I would love your input on. So the big obvious one is that documents, Redis is a key value store. Mongo has an abstraction of a collection of documents. So it's not obvious how to map a collection of documents into a key value store. What I've done, as you saw before, was basically encode the collection and the document ID in the key and put the value as the JSON encoded document. That works. It's not ideal. It's not very performant. So one of the questions that's very open is, should we use a different strategy? Redis, in particular, has hashes and sets, which might be better but aren't obviously so better. Currently, the Redis experiment supports the same Meteor and Mongo filters and queries. So the code is completely unchanged. The bad news is that it's incredibly inefficient. In order to do that, you have to fetch every key, fetch every document individually, and run the filter using the mini Mongo code. That is very slow, really wouldn't scale, is only useful as an experiment, really. So it tells us that we want the database to run the filter for us. But maybe we don't want to support the Mongo query language. Maybe we should have a different query language. The obvious downside is do we end up with a query language per database? We have Redis, MongoDB, SQL, Cassandra, DynamoDB. Are we going to have 20 query languages? The other good thing is that the Mongo query language feels quite nice in JavaScript, so it might be nice to keep that. But I'd love input. Good news, the Redis live update, Redis key space notifications works very well. There are a couple of quirks about always having to fetch the document and some fake operations, but that basically works and is great. So in conclusion, alternative databases are very possible. Something I was pleasantly surprised by was how well everything was architected and how easy it was to plug in Redis, even as a quick hack. Redis itself is unlikely to be a great production alternative, but what databases would you like to see? Is it SQL, Cassandra, Elasticsearch? Is it other data sources that are maybe exposed as APIs, like Twitter or Facebook or something like that? So that's over to you. Please come and find me afterwards if you have any questions. Thank you.
Questions?
Oh, or now. Hey.
I can see the Redis store being a great session, but on the server.
That is a good point, yeah, where you're not running the full queries.
Right, you have this reactive data source, it's just a key value store on the client, and you're just using that on the server. I think a lot of people could get used to that.
Sorry, so the question, by the way, was about using Redis, particularly for the case of the session store. And that is, I think, a great idea.
Are you talking about abstracting the mini Mongo as a query language for any database?
So the question was, am I talking about abstracting mini Mongo as a generic query language for any database? And certainly that's one of the approaches that could be taken. And that's what I did here for Redis. So I take the mini Mongo query language, which is basically the Mongo query language, more or less. And using the same mini Mongo code, I was able to run it against Redis, the documents that are stored in Redis. And that approach would work for any database. But because it's not native to the database, it has that overhead potentially. So for Redis, that overhead is basically intolerable. For other databases, it might be more tolerable. But maybe we want.
Could you create a mapper?
You could definitely create a mapper, but I mean, you can't create a mapper to Redis because there is no real query language underneath it. But yes, you could definitely create a mapper, for example, to SQL, where you were able to push down a lot of those predicates down to SQL and have that be a lot more efficient. But then the question is, do you want something that looks more like SQL, or do you want to be using the Mongo query language with SQL? And that's a question for the community, I think. Oh.
When you say that Redis is not, or the work you did is not likely to be a production alternative, is that specifically referring to the fact that supporting complex queries doesn't perform well? Like if you were imagining, I was thinking of making this app with Redis, and the data model is a good fit for Redis, and now I want to use it with Meteor. Like you could imagine a Redis backend that just if you go into it, that it only supports Redis style operations that could perform well.
It could work. The big issue is that if you have like 1,000 documents in your collection, you're going to have to do 1,000 queries every time you get that collection. And so there's
no way to do just single document queries.
If you know that your documents were single document queries, I have implemented that optimization. But for the generic case, it's going to be a poor match.
But basically, for the case of any app you write in Redis in the first place, you're going to be writing single document things, right?
Hopefully. But then again, now we come to the question, like, should we support a specific mapping for Redis in that case?
Yeah.
One question from Twitter.
Oh.
They say, I'd like to see MySQL. It has binary log, which could act as Mongo's oplog. Is MySQL in the plans?
I think that's a great idea. And I will, sorry, the question was, is MySQL in the plans? And I think that's a great idea. They have, there's been log support, so yeah.
One last question.
I put in a vote for Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch has a lot of features search-wise if you're doing a lot of heavy search stuff that Mongo just doesn't have.
Yeah, I think so. There was a vote for Elasticsearch, which I think is a great one, very similar to Mongo in terms of the model, and has great full text search as well as nice predicates.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.